And something that they seem to have forgotten to teach people back in business school from when I used to be there, which was, if you're not out raising money and you can internally generate funds, why do you care about your stock price? And the answer is, well, you might want to raise money someday, so there's a real option, to use the current lingo, that matters. Well, there are lots of other real options that matter that don't seem to get discussed in these things. So when you look at some of the stuff Suzanne talked about, there's a discrepancy between efficiency, all this just-in-time stuff, et cetera, and resiliency. If you don't have surplus resources lying around, if you don't have some excess in the organization, it is very hard for the efficient organization to be resilient. You tend to be very good at a particular context. And if something happens for the context to change, you might be lucky and the resources that you happen to have arrayed to be very efficient at the context that you're good at still work. Or it may be totally miserable. And you're talking about living at internet speed. How many of those internet companies seem to do great in a particular context that in the course of the business cycle survived for 3 months? And their stocks went like this, then they went like that. Because the context moved on, and they were designed to be completely efficient around one context, and one context only. And when the context altered, so did the perceived value of the company.
But I would also argue, Mike, that the external events do have a profound effect on these things that are up here, on these points. That,
Yes.
Yeah, that there is an impact from the world pressures, even though that they are created pressures, even though they may be false pressures, that they do have a profound effect on what is produced within.
Well, we can go back to Suzanne's. I mean, it still feeds back into this.
Mhm.
What's the next one?
I mean, what he was saying.
I wanted to go back to the non-report. This one actually shows data, Suzanne.
No, I was thinking, he was saying that the industry and the economy impact back to the corporation, the inside of the corporation.
But the way they have the impact is because something happens where there's an experience,
Yes,
or there's an emotional
where there's an
reaction,
internal experience
or
per person,
somebody
yes.
comes up with some wacko rationalization or justification on TV. You could take the CNBC thing with Jim Cramer yelling and screaming on TV about some thing that may then move on, or the Wall Street Journal writes an editorial, or whatever. Some rationalization is been creeping into this because it alters an explanation.
So that's what you're saying, that external data coming in there
Yes.
to the left can come in as from Ron, was Ron saying? Got it.
Now, given this, the question becomes, is there a tool that we can give you to help you rethink? Okay,
That's the $100 question.
yes, all right. So I'm now going to switch over to a tool. All right, I'm going to leave this one up. The tool, I'm going to start by drawing a 2x2 matrix.
Comfy?
All right, because it makes everybody feel good.
Comfy?
All right, but I'm going to point out to you that the normal thing that happens in a 2x2 matrix is that you pick some quality, and that quality is then arrayed with a quantity. And the same thing happens on this side. Some quality, which then gets. So it might be that this is high, low. Or however it is that you make it work, and then you can plot where you are in the graph. This is the normal how to do a 2x2. So I'm going to give you a completely different 2x2 that you have to then blow apart. All right, so new tool. We start with wherever you are. Now the self could be you, your team, the group, the company, the identity, it doesn't matter, but there's some self. Now, to stay with this quality quantity thing, but again, we're going to blow it apart, what moves away from self? Well, usually group, but it could be environment.
You say other.
Well, other is still further out here. Other is down here someplace. Right? So that's one way of moving away. Now, the other way of going is to say that the self, in reaction to the environment, produces these explanations, expectations, this loop. And I can call that loop so in reaction to an environment and a context, self-organization. All right? In reaction to some context, the self, in dealing with that context, goes through these loops and organizes the loop. It finds some way to maintain itself within the boundary and container that it's given. Now, if I move away from those two things, what falls into that my last little box here? And what falls into the last little box is the part that's the most interesting, which is how do you deal with everything else? So it's how do I deal with emergence? To make a decision about a case, you could do all that nice quantitative stuff and do the yes, no's. Or you could start asking, when I start arraying the questions that are built into the case along this, what is it that when all these things start dialoguing with one another, is going to lead to an answer that has some resilience, that can withstand changes as I talk about the various conditions. This is a very different way of thinking about how to answer the case. Because I'm not positioning myself on the 2x2 matrix and then saying, if I agree that I want to be in position, we think that we're here and we want to be here, and to get here I do X, Y, and Z. That's relying on best practices and categorizing and saying, people that are in this box behave this way, people that are in this box behave this way, so I have to move this way, and that tells me what to do. This is very different than that. This instead says, when I examine the issue from where I am now, when I look at the context that I am dealing with, and then we're drawing a boundary, Suzanne, and saying, I'm not dealing with that. And I go through these loops to figure out how I cognize it, how I explain it, how I understand it. How do I deal with whatever it is that could emerge or that does emerge? And if I can find an answer that allows me resilience, that's another answer. Maybe the same one, but it's just another way of coming at it that is very different from where am I on the position chart and what's the best practice related with where I'm going. It's not the same as finding a category and applying the labels that go with the category. And as you keep working through this dialogue, just like when you start going through these loops, the answers keep changing. So at any given moment, you may have some answer that feels right, but then the world changes. September 11th happens, and England 7/7 happens or whatever, and the question is, do you have the resilience to keep going? It is interesting to look at companies and cases where there's efficiencies in the just-in-time stuff, and they're operating at very good margins because of that, and you start asking about this, and when you get to this part, and you ask about, and what if this changes? There's no answer. In fact, when you start challenging this, the whole notion of self starts falling apart, as does the explanation that's into the self-organization, et cetera. You just don't find, it just unwinds. Look at what happens in the auto industry when when a parts factory goes on strike.